So, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Hannah from the Bangor Public Library. Just wanted to say a quick hello and thank you all for coming to this another installment in our series that we do along with SCORE Northern Maine on different programs related to small business ownership and entrepreneurship. Today we're going to be talking about grant funding, which is very exciting and ever changing, as we've seen. So I will let Donna from SCORE share a little bit about their program and mission, and then she'll introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, Hannah. So my name is Donna Cassesi. I'm with SCORE Northern Maine. SCORE basically helps anybody start a business, continue to run their business, decide to sell their business. So we're kind of with people all the way from I have an idea to I'm ready to leave the business. And so I would welcome any of you if you have an interest in getting some help from a SCORE mentor. All you have to do is go on score.org and put request a mentor. It'll ask you a couple of questions about what you need help with, and then you'll be matched with a SCORE mentor. And I think the really exciting thing is in Maine, we have 120 mentors. And so that means that you really get advice that you need. So, for example, I have a strong background in manufacturing, but I don't know much about social media. So if I get you as a client starting as a manufacturing type person and we get into anything involving social media, I will quickly say, okay, we're going to get another mentor to help you. So you really end up with a team of people who are experts. So again, I'd welcome you to uh, give us a note, score.org. Let us know if you want a mentor, and we'd be happy to help you. Really excited about today's program because I would say of all the clients I mentor, about 80% of them, first question at the first meeting is, do you think I can get a grant? And so this really, I think, will answer a lot of questions and give you an opportunity to ask questions as well about how to go about getting a grant, what are the opportunities, and what are some of the pitfalls. So what we have is our guest speaker, Victoria Flynn. She's a SCORE volunteer. She also owns her own business, and she's focused on developing funding strategies, grant research, and grant writing. So we've really got somebody who basically spends her whole life working on grants. And with that, Victoria, we're really looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. This is a presentation I've given before, and I keep coming back to it as really a foundational background in grants because we have all heard about what grants can be, and when we hear about it, grants often sound like free money, and everybody gets really excited. And grants can sound like really big wins. We all hear about $1 million here and $2 million there. And, for small businesses and newer nonprofits, especially, it's a very exciting prospect. But once you kind of get started, you might start feeling like grants sound like a lot of work, maybe more work than you're ready for. And this presentation is not to discourage you, it's really to help you get an idea of what you will need to get grants going in your business or for your nonprofit, and what opportunities there really are. So grants are assistance, often financial, not always entirely financial. And that assistance is provided to promote a positive effect for both the awardee and the funder. Unlike a loan, there's no interest to repay. And that's where you start getting the feeling that this is free money. But unlike a gift or donation, there's usually an ongoing expectation from the person or entity that's giving the money to your organization. And that could mean that you have to be transparent in your financials. You need to build collaborative relationships, report regularly. Failure to comply with your grant agreement can lead to forced repayment or disqualification from future awards. So, this is not the same thing as a loan. It's not the same thing as a contract, and it's not the same thing as a gift. There are strings, but some strings are different than others. And it's really hard sometimes to figure out if you are ready to take on this kind of commitment. Grants are always a funder's investment in projects that forward the funder's goals. unlike a loan where the expectation is that the funder is going to make money back, the funder's reason for giving money with a grant is to see work done in the world that changes the world in the way they would like it to be changed. That might mean that one funder is giving you money to hire new people, and the next funder is giving you money because they want to improve economic development by increasing the number of construction projects in the community. So you might hire staff with the first grant and build more office space with the second, but there are very different reasons to give money, and that money ends up being restricted to those things that the funder really wants you to spend them on. Grants are available to a wide range of applicants. Grants are not just for nonprofits. There are grants for individuals, usually for things like education. But for the most part, we are talking in this presentation about grants for organizations, whether they're for-profit businesses, nonprofits, some municipalities. All of this applies there pretty well. Grants are great tools that can fund a lot of different costs. I just named two, bringing on new staff, capital construction projects, capital equipment purchases. Some are unrestricted. We'll talk about that later. Things that, money that you can spend however you need it most. And grants are only a portion of a strong funding strategy for any type of organization. Even the best nonprofits cannot rely entirely on grants. And it is imperative that you start thinking about the other revenue sources as well as grants. It's not always a one-track thing. Grants are also highly competitive. Grants are not fast and free and easy money. Grants can take a lot of time to write, and then you wait for a response, and then you may have to spend more time writing reports and managing the money, and that takes time, which is also a cost to a lot of small businesses and entrepreneurs and nonprofits. It takes time to get those things done, and if you're not doing them, you're often paying someone to do them. And they're not always easy. A lot of times, your first grant can take much longer than all the other applications you write. If you decide to get into the federal or state grant space, those applications could take 30, 40 hours or more. And that's a big challenge. It's a tall order for a lot of smaller organizations. Grants are not inherently flexible. If you get money to fund a staff position, you probably can't hire somebody else instead for a different position with the money that you are awarded. You need to go check with your funder. If you have a delay in construction, or if you strike gold and need to move where your new office is going to be placed, you may need to talk to your funder before you can do those things. They're not inherently flexible across the board. It definitely requires communication to make sure that the money you've received is still applicable to what you're doing. Not all grants are big, and they're not all $1 million wins, and not all of them are small. There's not all $1,000 either. There's a grant for every size and every space. The question is really, who is eligible for it, and is that you? Not all grants are federal government funded. As much as we saw a lot of discussion about the effects of a potential federal grants freeze, there are plenty of grants out there that are not affected by it. We'll talk a little bit more about that deeper into the presentation. And grants are not a great reason to expand your services or programs. This is not, getting free money. Again, free money is not a good time to decide that you want to do something brand new. And you really have to have a good reason to do it, just like adding any program at any point, or adding a new business line. You really have to make sure that it's right for you and your organization. So, what does it take to get a grant? Where do you start? We're going to talk through several of these parts of the process today. The place to start is really grant readiness. Are you, as an organization, are you as a leader in your organization ready to take these things on? That's what's in this red triangle here. That understanding that what pieces you need to get a funder to feel ready to fund you. And then you can move into prospect research. That's where you start really looking at what's available and spending time deciding whether or not you're eligible. Once you've found a few, you move into grant writing, which is what everybody thinks of when they're talking about grants. You decide you get notification that you've been awarded or denied the request. If you're denied, you start back all over again. And if you win, then you move on into actually spending the money and grant management and evaluation phases. So, what is grant readiness? That's something that a lot of people don't really think about when they are starting out. That's a phrase that you will get to know once you've done this for a while. Just like a loan applicant wants to be bankable, you may need to be grant ready. And that may mean having a really good understanding and having all sorts of documents ready to prove your organizational health, your fiscal health, the readiness of your project to be funded, and understanding sort of this culture of evaluation where you are able to talk about how effective your program was or your work was in doing what you said you were going to do. That is easy in the case of building an office. Is the office built? Yes, it is. But if you said you were going to build a passive office, use passive house techniques to build a net zero energy office, well, you're going to need enough information to be able to prove that at the end. So making sure you have the capacity to get these things together to make sure your project is ready to prove these things in the end is important. Not all funders are going to require these things, but understanding what you need to have in order to determine your eligibility and in order to get to that application phase is a huge step in the right direction. And the more work you do ahead of time, the better. If you're already feeling nervous about applying for grants at this phase, it may mean that you're not really grant ready yet. If you think you've got a lot of these things handled, then it's kind of time to start moving. So if to determine whether or not you're grant ready, you need to have this grant readiness info, a clear, concise view of why a funder should care. Why are you doing this work? What is important to the funder? What is important to your community? What is important to certain aspects like economic development, workforce readiness, especially if you're a business. We also see in Maine, we see some trade grants, some grants for technological developments. These are the reasons why a funder would care to invest money through a grant program into your work. You also need an idea of what work you'll perform, and you need to make sure you've set aside time to tackle the applications ahead. You're also going to need, like I said, that grant management piece. Understanding what you're going to need to determine the efficacy of your program. You're going to need to make sure you've got transparent accounting at the ready, and you're going to need to make sure you can spend a couple hours a week making sure that you've charged things to the right account, you've spent the right time, you know what's going on with this project. It's not a set it and forget it kind of use of this money. All right, we're going to take a break before we get to research. There are going to be a couple of myth checks throughout the program. And this one is the myth is that you can't get a grant if you haven't been in operation for a certain amount of time. That's not true. Every funder has different goals. So there are funders out there for brand new organizations that are just starting, and there are funders out there for organizations that have been around for a long time and have only have a certain amount of money or higher in their reserves. If you're smaller, look for capacity building grants for staff training, for additional staffing. Um, those are going to be a little bit more available to smaller organizations. And you also might want to look into seed money grants. Those are often very small and few and far between, but they do exist. So just because you're small, just because you're new, doesn't mean that grant funding isn't out there for you. You just have to find the right funder at the right time. All right. So it's time for prospect research. This is another huge area of time commitment for most newer organizations if you haven't done research before. When you get started, You're going to need to answer most of these questions in order to determine whether your programs are a strong fit for, whether grant programs are a strong fit for your needs. Consider this, for example. One initiative might cost you $50,000 to finish, but really, you'd be able to generate income once you've got $10,000 of an investment, sort of generating, getting the wheel going. On the other hand, you might need $50,000 to get it going, and if you got 49,999, you wouldn't be able to do it. Knowing these things ahead of time will mean that you have a better understanding of which programs are a good fit for you. Grants are also usually offered with specific terms. So you've got general operating or unrestricted grants. Those can be used for anything. That's the sweet spot that everyone's looking for. Program and project grants are focused on doing something of interest to the funder. Capacity grants fill overhead needs for staffing, administrative support, so that your organization has more figurative room to work. If you need more literal room, that's when you're looking for capital grants. Of course, everyone wants general operating and unrestricted funding. So understand that those opportunities are probably going to be the most competitive. When you're thinking of the terms that you'll be using, the terms of your grant program, you'll need to know when you can spend the money and how quickly you'll be able to spend it. Most grants do not cover retroactive costs. So unless you get unrestricted funding, you cannot recoup money that you've already spent on a project. You also won't want to bind yourself to a program that requires you to forego opportunity costs later, just in the hope of money. Nor do you want to necessarily tackle a program that expects you to finish in a year, what's realistically going to take you 18 months. So those are the data points that you're going to need to kind of have on hand to decide whether grant programs are a fit for you. You also need to know that you've got the resources to do the work you're proposing, and that includes who's doing the work. And you're going to want to make sure that that work makes sense for you. A bakery is not going to want to tackle a grant to start selling tires just because they found a good deal on tires and found a grant to let them. Nobody knows that that's where tires are sold, and people aren't necessarily interested in buying tires from their baker. But if that same bakery had, say, an Italian line cook who really wanted to make ready to go pasta for dinners, maybe they decide to find funding for that extra staff time or for specific pasta machines so that they can do ready to go lunches and dinners that this individual puts together and expands their business and maybe stays open a little longer. That's what makes sense, that who's doing it, what's important to your organization. and and then once you have all that, you need to start really queuing in very carefully to that understanding of why it's important, or to the funder. Are you doing work for the community? Are you serving others? This is especially true for nonprofits. Are you representing a target demographic for their goals? Are you employing low-income individuals? Are you employing veterans or people of specific ages? These are things that certain funders are more interested in than others, and sort of knowing why you're doing things and knowing what may align may be able to get you into a different grant program than you'd originally thought. When you're looking through grants, there are different types of grants. There's a sort of big buckets that people usually think of, where to find grants and who the funders are. Obviously, everybody's thinking about state and federal grants right now because it's been all over the news. These are often very big programs with a lot of money. There's a lot of competition for these as well. They are very complicated awards to apply for. They're complicated to win. It's complicated to manage them, and it's complicated to close them out correctly. These are compliance nightmares to some people, and they're very easy to others. It just depends on what your expertise is and how much you're willing to learn and listen, and what resources you're willing to bring to the table. If you've got a great CPA, if you've got a great CFO, these things might be easier for you than your neighbor who has been around for 10 years but doesn't have that resource. Some for-profits in some fields have more opportunities than others in the federal and state grant field. Starting on grants.gov is a great place to go. The state of Maine also has a procurement website where they are listing open grants. and you may be able to find other opportunities listed department by department through the state of Maine. This is, however, a changing field. So, speaking of the federal grant freeze, as of today, we know that there is an injunction preventing the U.S. government from freezing access to existing federal grant funds. But while the funding freeze was initially not intended to affect individuals and individual assistance, we have seen that there may be some implications of a freeze like that for individuals enrolled in state administered assistance and for many organizations and municipalities who have had assistance from the federal government or that has been directed from the federal government to state governments and so on. If a different type of freeze is pursued in the future, we'll definitely have to watch closely to understand who it affects. What we do know is that there are no promises for the future. We don't know how the current administration's priorities are really going to translate to action. So we don't know what programs will be available, reworked, or canceled as we move forward. Right now, some of the best advice I've seen is to just go forward cautiously and carefully and communicate with all the people that you would usually communicate with in applying to make sure that you know as much as they know about whether the program will happen. If you're talking to a federal grant administrator or a program officer and they say they still have a job and that they intend to read applications, well then it's probably a good idea to send them an application and get your name in there just in case. As changes are made to the flow of funding to funding programs and the flow of funding to states, cities, economic development agencies, counties, cities, towns, tribal units, that flow is going to change. It doesn't mean that small businesses and nonprofits won't be able to access federal grants. It just means that we're in a particularly unpredictable and challenging place in the governmental funding cycle. Programs you've heard about for years may disappear and may not resurface, though we're hopeful that more will arise as well. And honestly, a lot of these shifts happen with every administrative change, but it's just particularly stark this cycle, especially because of the freeze itself. So, just because this freeze was talked about and was on the table, doesn't mean that you can't go after federal funding if that has been an option. But definitely keep an eye on programs and understand that things may be different this year than they were last year. Moving forward, foundation and corporate grants are another great source. Often these are targeted for nonprofits, but some of them will fund individuals and small businesses. If you are a small business, you also may find that there is a way to partner with a nonprofit to provide your services and to work with that nonprofit to submit a grant that would pay them so they can pay you. Foundation and corporate grants are hugely varied in their application processes. As a grant writer, I can spend 45 minutes writing a big application, a sorry, for like a $50,000 application for one client. And the next day I'm spending 5-6 hours writing a $10,000 application for the next client. It really depends on the funder. There is no one set application. And that also means that you don't really have the ability to reuse every application just because you've written one. It takes time to customize. It takes time to make sure that you're really making that application fit well for the funder. And because foundations are so different from each other, you may find that you're applying for very different pools of money from very different funders. Foundation and corporate grant opportunities are often found through premium databases. Some local libraries have access to these premium databases. Databases can be really expensive, however. So if you are considering going for one on your own, definitely make sure that you are looking at what that opportunity is costing you and think about other ways you may be able to find it. Googling works. It takes time. But you may have other options other than just spending the money for premium database access. Economic development grants are a big one for small businesses and entrepreneurs. These can often be pass-through funds that originate as federal, state, or local government loans. So those are loans that are happening, and they are using that loan money to grant you grant you funding, which is great. Whether or not these will all, that this landscape will continue the way we have seen it here in Maine will again depend on sort of where things fall on the federal level. It is more likely for small businesses to be able to tap into national funding. We saw that with ARPA and other grants. And in that vein, of course, ARPA is going away. We know that that funding is mostly closed out at this point. But that's an example of a point where there was a lot of money for small businesses in particular in one program. Significantly smaller funding is available through economic development grants. These may be, $10,000, $50,000 grants, which is not small for many small businesses. But we're not talking about $1 million, $2 million federal contracts either. This is a great reminder to sign up for your local economic development agency or the Economic Development Council's email. They may have resources that, just like SCORE, or they may work alongside SCORE, depending on where you are, to make sure that they can connect you with other grant programs as well, even if they're not administering the funding. Finally, there are some professional association grants. These are often a source of scholarships and research funding for individuals and small businesses. They are kind of on the smaller side, but the range definitely varies depending on where you're looking. They can be a good source of potential professional development needs and conference funds if you are looking to, build your profile sort of by going to conferences and meeting with other people. Um, if you are a member of a professional organization, the best place to find these is straight at the source. Go check the organization's website and see how things go. All right, that was a lot of information, so let's get another myth check. There's this idea that eligibility guidelines are like job requirements. Just apply. Maybe they'll accept us. They say 3 to 5 years, and my experience in this field is applicable. Yeah, not in grants. Eligibility is usually the first way that funders eliminate applicants. If they say that you needed to be open on January 1st, 2020, and you opened on January 2nd, 2020, you may not be eligible. If you need to have a budget under $500,000 to apply, and your budget is $500,001, you are not eligible. So be very cautious about applying for grants if you have anything that stands out as a red flag on their eligibility list. If you're not sure, reach out. Program officers are more than happy to say, yes, you're not eligible, because that means that there's one more application they don't have to read. And rather than spending 10 hours, 5-10 hours putting an application together and worrying about it for months, you can just know ahead of time, not eligible, let the opportunity go. All right, but what about my business? This is a point where you're starting to think, are grants really right for me? So you have to understand what the risks and rewards are. You always risk your return on investment plummeting if you don't win the grant, because you've spent time, maybe you spent money hiring a grant writer, and there's always a chance you don't win. Nationally, the win rate across all grant writers, all communities, all nonprofits, it's about 20%. So that's 5 applications you have to send out to get 1 yes on average. And that obviously is just a statistic. It doesn't mean that's predicting your future success, but it does mean that you have to acknowledge that there's no guarantee that you're going to get the money. Their ROI will be really low if you win grants that require more work than they fund. I worked with a nonprofit once that got $10,000 of free dog food for their animal shelter. They were so excited. But then it took 40 staff hours to end up putting the reports together at the end. It wasn't worth the $10,000. It was a huge stressful inflection point in their year, and it didn't work out well, and they decided not to apply for that again. It was easier to just spend $10,000 on dog food rather than waiting for the grant and having to do all that management again. You always risk when you take on any financial obligation with a new partner. You are beholden to the contract you sign with them, and you have to be following their priorities. If you sign on to a grant application, or sorry, if you sign a grant contract that isn't really right for your organization, it could lead you astray. And a lot of nonprofits and small businesses are not ready to sort of tackle something that they aren't really built to do. Risks Grants are also an obligation to keep the funder's priorities at the forefront. So if you decide that your peanut butter and jelly drive is better suited for the homeless shelter than the after school program of your local high school, your funders may be upset if they were giving in order to end child hunger, if you just change your program. So you have to stop and think. Your grant contracts may make you less agile, may make you really stick to one goal, and may make it to where you don't have the ability to shift and feel things out. Grants are also a capacity and bandwidth suck if you have chosen the wrong one, if you really haven't thought through what your resources are at the end. Um, it means that your capacity and bandwidth is tied to the funded project, which may not be something, again, you don't want to take on if you want to remain sort of an agile organization that's responding very quickly to needs in your community or opportunities you're seeing for your business. All that said, the rewards can be great. Getting a new partner, whether it's a funder or an investor, can be really bring new energy and experience into your organization. Some funders, especially for nonprofits, offer technical assistance, and you may end up getting far more than just the dollar amount on the page for your contract when you team up with a new funder through a grant program. Targeted funding and high expectations can fuel fantastic work. We entrepreneurs know that in whether we're in nonprofits or for-profit sectors, a good challenge may be all we need to sort of really get going and reach the next high bar. And grants can help us do that by not only funding the work, but giving us something to work towards. Grants are a strategic tool for many nonprofits. They are the backbone of many budgets, and they're not going away. They are a reward that is worth the risk for many nonprofit organizations. Grants can also be more consistent than other funding sources like crowdfunding. There's no interest, again, like loans, and you may not have to deal with repayment so long as you're meeting your obligations. Publicity and marketing opportunities also abound when you get a grant. Unless your funder has said, don't tell anybody about this, which happens, it's a great time to shout to the hills, tell your local newspaper, release a blast on your social media that somebody has decided to join your team, that you've got more faith in your corner from a trusted resource, and that you have more money to fuel what you're doing. Another myth check. I only need to write one grant application. After that, I can just resend it to all the other funders. We talked about this a little bit. I jumped the gun earlier. You can't reasonably recycle an entire application every time, any more than you could recycle a cover letter for a job interview. You really do need to go through and make sure that everything is really well targeted to the funder. Again, using that peanut butter and jelly sandwich drive idea. If you decided to apply to an organization that cared more about funding, the end to child hunger, you're going to target your application to those things. You might do the same, you might use the same event with a different pitch to another organization if what they want to fund is more volunteer time for seniors in your area, and those are the people who are going to be making your sandwiches at your drive. Same program. A lot of the information will be the same across the applications, but you really need to make sure that you are pulling those things very carefully across both and making sure that you're talking about the right objectives and metrics for each funder. That said, you are absolutely allowed to reuse content, and sometimes you can reuse a lot of content. There is a huge push, especially in the nonprofit industry, to encourage foundation funders to accept applications that that organizations have written to other funders, to be able to reuse reports that have been written for other funders. Not everybody accepts things like this, but if you see that opportunity, it's definitely worth taking. All right. So what are your next steps? This gets you all the way through that grant application process. and gets you through that idea of, determining whether grants are really right for you. If they are right for you, talk to your SCORE mentors and your subject matter experts. We're here to help you figure out what's out there for you. As a subject matter expert, when I work with SCORE clients, I am happy to do everything from talk through sort of that keyword research on Google to figure out how to find grants. I have edited or helped edit and sort of double check grant applications, and I've helped figure out what the strategy could be in applying, making sure that each grant application is really tied well for each funder. In Maine, we have some fantastic resources: the Maine Technology Institute, MTI, MITSI, which is the Maine International Trade Center, almost forgot that one for a second, CEI, and several others. There are lots of organizations out there who are very much interested in helping the state and the federal government get money into the hands of small businesses. And they oftentimes provide a lot of technical assistance and have many amazing resources for finding grants that are out there. CEI, I believe, just updated their grant list last week, sort of amid the federal hubbub. So this is a great time if you think grants are for you. Go check out those resources, see what's available to you, see what assistance that you may be able to get, and really start thinking about what that looks like. If you're feeling at this point that grants aren't for you, it's not the end of the funding road. This is not the, oh no, you'll never be ready, you'll never be here. Look at government contracts. They're a much different space. They require a different amount of work. They require a different kind of application. Look at loans, especially community level funders. There are more programs than ever, and hopefully those will continue, especially with the changing distribution of federal funding. We may see some changes in sort of what loan assistance is available as well. You can seek investors and major donors, building those contacts up person by person through your network, through your boards. That's really important. Even if you are going after grants, that is something that everybody's talking about right now. Is making sure you're shoring up sort of what that individual giving might look like for you and your organization. And of course, there's establishing partnerships with other organizations, creating grant eligible opportunities for both, like that private, public, nonprofit, for profit partnership I talked about earlier. And these can also increase your capacity to eliminate the need for funding. So if you have nonprofits who are using your services and they're getting grants to pay you, it means that you're getting paid more, and you may not need, because you've got that income coming in, you may not need to rely so much on sort of an external source for your grant funding. And that is the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take questions and talk through anything else that anybody else would like to chat about in the grant world, what's going on, individual questions for your organizations, your businesses, anything like that.
Thank you, Victoria. Yeah, we're a pretty small group, so if folks have questions, if you'd like to just unmute yourselves and speak up, that's fine. Or if you'd prefer to type into the chat, you can do that and I'll read them out for Victoria to answer. So feel free to chime in with any questions you have, specific pitches or questions related to your particular situation. So Mike's asking a library related question. Do we offer resources for grant research such as database access? We don't have specific database access included in our digital collections for grant funding. I know I've helped folks with this kind of research before at the reference desk, and you're welcome to either come by or email the reference desk. And we are happy to do what research we can. There are other organizations around the state that provide database access like on site. Like Victoria mentioned, a lot of these databases are very expensive, including for institutions to subscribe to. So it's kind of that balance of like trying to serve the needs of the whole public what things we subscribe to. But if you want to the library to help as a starting point, to just be like, okay, if you're researching grants, here are some places you could go look, here are some tools that you could use. You're always welcome to get in touch and we can help as best we can. But at Bangor specifically, we don't have database access for those grant databases. We do have actually some print resources still, like directories, that can also be a starting point. Mary Davis asks, what implications tax-wise do grants have on a small business? You got thoughts on that, Victoria?
I am not a tax consultant. So I would not take anything I say with with anything more than a grain of salt, and I would definitely talk to your tax person about it. But for a small business, I would assume that you're talking about income. The same way, you've got to think about that for an individual, and nonprofit, it's a different world, but I believe it would still be revenue. Talk to your tax person. I'll ask mine. So next time somebody asks me that, I can say, well, my tax person said, but I am not a tax person, so I cannot unfortunately guarantee you that is the truth.
Yes, that is the watch cry of librarians at this time of year too. I
Yeah.
cannot give you tax advice.
Yeah.
We can print you a form, but all right, we have another question. It sounds like we've got another library in the chat. They say we are a small specialized library. No one else has ever written a grant, and they're very timid about this. Is there any resource for the actual writing?
Um, if you talk to a SCORE mentor, I'd be happy to talk with you guys. Sometimes that is that's the key, is just finding some free advice somewhere, and SCORE is happy to jump in with that. Having written a pro bono grant and won one for my very small library locally, um, uh, it is possible. It is absolutely possible. It just depends on what the grant is. In my experience for that grant, it was an ALA grant. We needed information about what we were doing. We needed information about the circulation and the size of the population and the demographics. All of that stuff was available, even in our small library, thanks to um, just the reports they were already doing for the state, which was fantastic. I did not have a lot of work. It took me an hour or two to put all the narrative together, just sitting down with a librarian and going through the form she'd already filled out for that previous year. Are all grants like that? No. But, finding a good one for you might be finding one that's kind of easy to fill out, getting to the point where you can see the application and picking one that you feel like your organization can manage to start. And I mean, again, if you want more specific advice than that, get in touch with SCORE, and see if you can, pull me into a conversation and we could talk more about that.
Yeah, I'll add just from the library perspective, since this is a library asking the question. I've been involved with different grants and grant applications here. And like Victoria was saying in the presentation, there's a really wide variation of like, I've worked on some that are super simple, that are basically like, write one paragraph about what you want to do. And like, we're just dying to fund these projects and give this money away. And that have also had, on the other end, very simple reporting requirements, right? Like, we do not need an itemized budget of everything that you spent this money on. Just like write us a paragraph about what it went to, and you're good to go. And I've also worked on ones that are like way more complicated, that have a lot of paperwork. So I think trying to find one that is more accessible makes a lot of sense for building that confidence to know that people on staff or volunteers even can do it. It's, just gotta take it one step at a time. Lori was asking, I don't want to take all the time asking about my company, but I don't know if applying for grants would be right for our needs. Should I talk to someone from SCORE about this?
Absolutely. I think that's a great first step, in figuring out whether, what your industry looks like and what, SCORE mentors know about grants in your industry and what you're doing. I mean, we could talk now, but again, it's, you're right that it's sort of we'd have to probably take a good half hour figuring out what you're doing and how you're doing it and why you're doing it, in order to help you get to that point where you feel more comfortable determining whether it's a good space for you.
And Mike also threw in a comment addressing that earlier question about the small library and said, I'm a freelance grant writer with more than 15 years of experience, and I'd be happy to talk with you. So that's very good community connections through the chat. I can put you guys in touch if you want email addresses shared from when you signed up. Just drop me a line. And I will send out the recording. And Victoria, if you're able to share your slides with me, I can include those in the follow-up email as well, so everybody has all that information.
Donna,
All
sorry,
right.
I had some technical difficulties, so I may have missed something. So if I'm not repeating anything, but the New Ventures Maine is offering a $1,000 mini grant right now. I think the application is due February 15th. So for those of you who maybe have a small need and want to get started, it's somewhat competitive, but I don't think it's very complicated to apply for, and might just be the boost that your organization needs. So just go to type New Ventures Maine, and right on the website, you'll find out how to apply.
Is that the marketing mini grant?
Yes.
All right, I can put that in the chat.
Oh, that would be great. And I have had some clients be successful at winning it. So
I'll take a minute also to plug MTI. So the Maine Technology Institute, if you are in a technology related field, and they have their own definition of what that looks like, and you are based in Maine as a for-profit business, there are some amazing resources that they have access to, including the MERC program, where they cover costs for up to 50% of a consultant's fee when you are working with a consultant. So that's a really exciting thing for a lot of small businesses who need marketing help, grant writing help, and programmers, all sorts of stuff would be covered by the MERC program. So it's not a grant, but it is assistance. And actually it's assistance that can help you get grants if that's what the track that you need is. And it means that you're working with a Maine-based contractor as well. And the clients I've gotten to work with as a MERC consultant myself in my personal side, we've had really good experiences with it. And they also work really closely with SCORE. So, there's just a lot of sort of technical networking that happens to support small businesses around here. And it's phenomenal. I love it. So if you haven't checked them out and haven't looked into that as a way to cover costs for a consultant that you may be working with, head over there and give it a look.
Great.
All right.
Are there other questions? We've got a few more minutes if anybody wants to get, more specific, digging into your particular situation or just general questions.
I really want to thank Victoria. This is just, even for someone who helps people on a regular basis, this is just a great refresher on the pitfalls and promises of grants. So I really appreciate your balanced view of this topic, Victoria. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And again, I hope everybody feels reasonably encouraged, not sad that this isn't going to work. I think it can work. I think we just need to make sure that we're all going in knowing what we don't know. And hopefully that helped you get there. I will share my slides, and if there are any other questions, I'm happy to help.
Right. And we're going to continue the funding theme with our next installment in this series, which is going to be on March 26th. That's another Wednesday at noon. And that's going to be specifically focused on funding opportunities for nonprofits, but it sounds like we might have at least one of those in attendance today. So I'll put the link to register for that in the chat now, and also include that in the follow-up email to everybody in case anyone wants to attend that one as well. Thanks to everyone for coming today. And thank you again, Victoria. It was great to share your expertise.
Thanks so much.
Everyone, and score.org if you want some help with having a mentor. Thank you. Bye.